believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom.
I'm Cheryl. It says Santa Cruz Black underneath there. And
It's nice to meet you.
same here. Um, I'm so glad you gave us your time.
And who are the other folks? Are you all with Santa Cruz Black?
Chris is a co-founder of Santa Cruz Black. Meilin is just jumped on to be part of the film series that we're doing. I'm curious to know how you got in Ferguson. How it's like you happened to be in Ferguson at the exact same time that Mike Brown was murdered, and so how did you find your way there? And then there's another part of that question is, do you have any relationship to Ferguson prior to 2014?
Yeah, so no, I wasn't on the ground when Mike Brown Jr. was killed. So the footage that you see um, basically up until gosh, when did we get there? We got there about a month after Mike Brown Jr. was killed. So the first maybe 20 minutes of the film where you see folks outside of the Quick Trip and that kind of initial outpouring into the street, all of that footage we gathered from citizen journalists who were right there on the ground who responded. So that's how I actually learned about it, is through social media, just like everyone kind of learned about it. I was in New York City at the time, and I worked at a nonprofit that did reentry, working with folks who were formerly incarcerated. So my mind was kind of in this area, thinking about the criminal justice system, thinking about racial justice. So when this happened, it was kind of like, it felt like a moment in history. It felt like something that I needed to be a part of. And so my classmate, Lucas Alvarado Ferrar, who's the cinematographer, and I went down there. And we weren't even thinking initially to make a documentary. We were going to try to do more of a rapid response type of documentation where we wanted to put out this alternate narrative than what we were seeing on television, and it organically evolved into a documentary. So I didn't have a relationship with Ferguson before this happened. And it was really important that we not just parachute in as outsiders and kind of take control of this narrative. So we started looking for people from the very beginning to be a part of the storytelling. And everyone was like, Damon Davis, Damon Davis, Damon Davis. He is a visual artist who's born and raised in St. Louis. He was already doing creative work around Mike Brown Jr. He wanted to tell this story, and so we joined forces about a month after Lucas and I, got on the ground.
How long were you in Ferguson for this?
We were there on and off for 18 months. So we would stay weeks to a month at a time. And initially we didn't have any funding. So we would go home, work, come back with whatever money that we could gather, continue filming. And we stayed with folks there was a Washington University professor who lent her space. We slept in churches. I mean, it was very kind of by the seat of our pants. So we were doing it at first.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Before this film, what was your favorite artistic accomplishment?
Ooh, of my own or in general?
Of yours.
Well, I was a theater kid, and my mom is a musician. I've always loved art. I've always been a writer, but I was actually pre-med, and I was not on a filmmaking track whatsoever. I studied biology at Columbia University and started to drift away from that path, just feeling more interested in the bigger picture, more interested in the systemic aspects of care and of wellness for people. So I started to think about public health, and that's what got me into nonprofit, and that's how I ended up working at a reentry organization. And when I was there, my role was strategic planning. So they had a set of strategic goals, and my responsibility was to assess how the organization could move toward those goals. And one of the goals was trauma-informed care. So in studying trauma-informed care and assessing this organization, I had the opportunity to interview employees across the organization, to interview incarcerated people across New York State, both juvenile, men, women, adults. Um, and that is what really set off the light bulb in terms of the power of interviewing, the power of narrative, and in terms of the prevalence of trauma and how experiences leave this residue that we call trauma with people and in people's bodies. And so when I saw the way that the protests were being portrayed on the news, my public health brain was like, this is a large scale traumatic event. This should be being looked at through a public health lens. So that was my initial kind of winding path toward even going to Ferguson and asking these questions. And then in collaboration with Damon, who was an established visual artist, we started to weave together our approaches to create an artistic expression that is really concerned with the wellness and well-being and sort of spiritual and emotional well-being of the people who are on the ground and of everybody who was taking in this narrative. Because part of what makes an experience, a negative experience, can be traumatic or not, part of it is how it's responded to. So people being called rioters and looters and thugs and all of these things was compounding the trauma that people were experiencing. So we were hoping to use this film and this art as a way to reflect the resilience and the love and the care and the community that we saw.
The first thing that struck me when I saw the film, I don't remember the brother's name. He had dreadlocks that came down to his shoulder. He had 2 children, and he had a ribbon on his jacket that said Palestine. So these activists also were doing some sort of support work for the Palestinian struggle. And I said, that was 2014. And I'm thinking how the through line, it just happened. And I'm thinking, and it's still happening today.
Yeah, so that is not at all a coincidence, and I can't talk about this without just lifting the name of Bassem Masri, who passed actually since the film has been released, and he was Palestinian. In 2014, you may or may not remember, but there was an incursion on Gaza. There was a tremendous amount of violence taking place in Palestine, and that was kind of what opened my eyes politically to say, I have to be a person who takes agency, that what I kind of thought of as a world where someone like the UN or someone would come in and step in when things are wrong, like that wasn't there. And then we see that happening today, that kind of out external third party, neutral party, peace force, idea does not actually exist. And there is no protection for the most vulnerable. And so that was happening in 2014 as it's happening now. I think what we see now is much more severe. So I would say that Palestinian activists were actually doing support work for Black Lives Matter because they were teaching us how to make gas masks out of soda bottles and how to use milk in the face of tear gas and how to have all of these tactics. They were teaching us how to use social media so that your narrative doesn't get erased. And so that solidarity there was very, very, very strong. And completely and utterly linked. And there's a scene in the film where Bassem explains the one-to-one correlation between the tactics that are being used in Palestine and the tactics that were being used in Ferguson. And a lot of people don't know this, but the NYPD, and I imagine other police forces, actually train in Israel. So there was a limit to how much kind of explicit intellectual analysis that we were able to put in the film while holding the emotional storyline that was important to us. But I do hope that people take away that police violence and the policing of marginalized bodies is global, and it's not a coincidence. These tactics are shared, the approaches are shared, the equipment is shared. So yeah, those struggles are absolutely linked.
So what's next for you? Is it going to be a documentary? Is it going to be a narrative type film? What?
That's a good question. I'm developing several documentaries and also working on a few scripts. I have a game that's based on a historical figure that's going to be an interactive quest that allows you to learn more about this person's life and also the kind of human themes that run through her life. So this has been a really, just fruitful time for me. I've been the beneficiary of a few grants that are unrestricted. So I've had the opportunity to really explore and kind of create from a place of curiosity, hopefully dive into some lighter topics. The XXX doc is really important to me because, I don't think that it's what people would have necessarily expected for me to do next, but it's really a continuation of my interest in public health, in mental health, and an opportunity to speak directly to young people about concerns like mental health and intimate partner violence. And also, I consider that film to be an act of narrative justice because we were able to uplift the story of the survivor in the process and sort of put their two stories side by side and really look at how the incidents really implicate all of us as a collective, as a society, and what are the impacts of domestic abuse, of the carceral system on young people. So I encourage folks, if you have nieces, nephews, anybody who's affected or in that age range, it's a really good film to start off an important conversation that I think we don't often get to have.
Well, I definitely intend to watch it.
I grew up in Spanish Lake, like, a 10-minute drive from Ferguson. So witnessing that someplace that is really, near and dear to me, just experiencing state violence. How has it changed in the 10 years since? Because my frame of reference is 10 years before. Now we are 10 years after. Like, what's the state of Ferguson today?
That's a good question. It last time I visited was maybe like 1 or 2 years ago. I know that the organizers who were involved, many of them like Kayla Reed, Brittany, a lot of them continue to organize and continue to engage in political struggle and run for office and support official campaigns. The racism and structural power is deeply, deeply, deeply entrenched. I don't have to tell you, this is a place where communities of color are experiencing a lot of systemic divestment because of the structure, the physical geography of the city, and the way that people are able to come in and work and then take that capital back out to the suburbs, and the folks in the city really don't benefit from the activity that goes on there. I don't have to tell you that the micro policing of the individual communities and people on these small levels, municipalities were getting up to 30% of their budgets from small tickets and fines, and this was putting an extraordinary amount of pressure on everyday people. And so these are things that I can't say have dramatically changed. I can say that the political awareness of folks has changed, but these are deeply entrenched power structures that go back for generations. And I think the reality is that, hypothesis around this being a traumatic experience was absolutely true. And although I do think that it's important that this film was made, that is not the same as having a healing response, having a response to treat and serve the members of this community. So all that I was able to do was bear witness. But I don't necessarily think that the community of Ferguson, or really St. Louis, because as you know, these municipalities are tiny and they're all connected. I don't think folks that got the care and the treatment and the help and the support and the follow-up that they deserved. We've seen the loss of a lot of these activists, Darren Seals, Bassem, and I know folks are experiencing burnout and fatigue and stress and trauma and all of those different symptoms. So, as we see with all the different cases of police violence nationwide, this continues to be an ongoing struggle. It continues to be an interconnected struggle. And it, it's almost like, I think we were a bit idealistic when we were saying, "Oh, this ain't this ain't our grandma's civil rights movement." Like, it is, it is.
It's funny.
We've been fighting it. We're still fighting.
Yeah, I just say this is the continuation. Now, I was born during the beginning of the civil rights movement, so I would say this is the continuation of the Black Power movement because that's where I got my consciousness growing up in Boston. But and so I'm not going to talk about me, but yeah, I jumped right in when well, living here in predominantly white area because it's like it's in my bones. I
Hmm.
breathe it. It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
nothing really has changed. Some of us are richer, some of us have better positions, but we're still, it's just change the language a little bit. It's the same old, same old.
Right.
You were going to a specific place which has a specific history. Were there aspects of the local history that guided you, right? Because in the very beginning, you have, I think the Dred Scott decision. Um, is that part of the like the trauma hypothesis that you were exploring?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Activists on the ground were very, very much aware of their local history, and that very much gave folks. I think there was a reason why St. Louis is the place where this really kicked off, because, as you all may remember, the year prior we had lost Trayvon Martin, and that was a really big kind of flare in the narrative, and that organizing looks very different. And I think that there's a reason why it looked the way that it looked in St. Louis, because these are folks who have been, in this power struggle for a very long time. They know their history. They know what their grandparents and great grandparents have been through, um, and even Missouri being positioned where it is, just on the border between the East and the West, the North and the South. So there's so much tension there. There's also, things that weren't explored in the film, where the KKK has been entrenched in that area for generations, and they have parades and celebrations that are sort of thinly veiled homage to these overt white power kind of celebrations. The St. Louis has one of the greatest income divides on any single street of the entire nation, because there's some major, major corporations and well-moneyed families that live there, just on the cusp of these sort of divested areas. And so there were safety reasons why there were things that couldn't be explored. There are questions that remain unanswered about what happened on August 9th and what has happened since. There's just a level of entrenched power that is intermingled with politics and policing, that I don't think that collectively we really have had the opportunity to totally pull the veil back on in this country. And that's very much alive in St. Louis. Chris, I don't know if that resonates with your experience growing up there, but that was what we saw.
When you say the word veiled, the first thing that comes to mind is the veiled prophet parade, So yes, very much so. Which I'll talk to Cheryl and Meilin more about that off of this conversation. But another thing, the Del Mar Divide, you're talking about that line, you can draw that line on a map, and it's incredible. And I also want to, I think in our discussion after the film, think about our geographic location here, if we have an analog to that, because I never really thought about that here. It's not as easy, it's a clear line horizontally, where just everything is split. So I appreciate you jogging my memory a little bit.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
no problem.
I had two questions for you before you go, and they just, they just left my mind. Goodness, I cannot believe it. Uh, One of them, well, okay, this is a silly, not a silly question. I have this thing about people's names. So I had to
Uh-huh,
look up your name and its origin. And
uh-huh,
it's something like, it means something like morning light and bright. And
uh-huh.
it's either Hebrew, Muslim, Arabic. This is what I got on Google. Uh, Origin. And am I saying it properly? Is it Sabaah? Because I heard someone else say it slightly different.
It,
And your last name, I say Folayan. Did I say that right or what?
so
It,
how my mom would pronounce it is Sabaah Folayan. So it's kind
oh,
of, if you Sabah is close, but if you just make the more of an ah, Sabah, the
mhm.
two syllables rhyme. It's not a big deal. And then Folayan, like Fola, and then like Yan, um, which is Yoruba and means, I think, confidence or something like that. So, and yeah, Sabah is Arabic. My father was Muslim. My parents are just very Afrocentric Americans. So, yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think I learned everything about African American history from my birth mother. She was gave me 100 years of lynching when I was 13.
Okay, that's what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah, because I didn't know. I wanted to know who was. My grandmother was talking about Emmett Till. Who's Emmett Till? And so then I got that book.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. See, not everybody was just waking up a couple years ago. A lot of people talk about this awakening. Like, not all of us were asleep.
I, I, I joke, and I was just telling me. I mean, sometimes I often say, sometimes I believe some people woke up on May 26th, 2020. You understand what I'm saying, right?
Mhm.
And they realize, oh, I said, that was not so with me.
Right. Right. Exactly.
If people are watching this film, um, some so many years after you released it, are there things that you're hoping by now people notice that, like, however they received it right when you released it versus say now, are there different reactions you're noticing? Are there insights you hope people make?
Um, that's interesting. I mean, I think that when you finish a piece of art, it kind of belongs to the world. And so I try not to be too preoccupied with what people do with it just because it's, it can send you in spirals. But if I have one hope for the film, I just hope that Black folks, oppressed folks, marginalized folks have that piece of pride. First of all, because I think we're gaslit constantly. So I hope that these images, for anybody who's someone's trying to tell them that they're just angry or they need to let it go, slavery was 400 years. We've all heard the gamut of arguments as to why we shouldn't be talking about the fact that we're oppressed. So I hope that these images allow somebody to feel validated and stand firm on what they know to be true about the nature of the society that we live in. And I also hope that people can embrace what we were trying to show about what love really means, what love of community and what love of country really means, because it doesn't mean pretending that things are okay when they're not. It doesn't mean standing by while people that you care about and people in your community are harmed. And it can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be going out into the streets, but that there's an element of love that is strong, that is firm, that is responsive, that is corrective when things are unjust and unfair.
Love that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for giving us your time. I
It's
wish we had more time.
my pleasure. Thank you guys for showing the film. I appreciate it. I've been at private white institutions for most of my education, so I understand what it feels like to be that handful of people in the mix. And so I appreciate you guys, and I hope the screening goes well.
Thank you. I think
Very much.
so.
So much.
All right, y'all. Happy Tuesday.
Take
Okay,
care.
happy Tuesday. Thank you.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe